Hi, welcome back to Story Time at the Suttons. We have a great book for you today. The book about a very hungry man and his very unusual food. It is The Old Man Who Loved Cheese. This is written by Garrison Keillor, illustrated by Anne Wilsdorf, and published by Little Brown and Company. Let's see what W.P. liked to eat. The Old Man Who Loved Cheese. There was an old man named Wallace P. Flynn who lived in a house in the trees. You could smell him for several miles downwind because of his fondness for cheese. For the cheese that was dear to W.P. was not the mild kind, such as brie, the cheese of polite society. No, he liked cheese that was in your face, that smelled like socks from a marathon race, cheese that really stank up the place. His wife knelt down and begged him, "Please, have mercy, Wallace, and change your cheese." His son said, "Cheese makes your breath so bad. It smells like death to be near you, Dad." His daughter asked him, "What is the sense of eating cheese that is so offensive?" Said Wallace P., "It's offensive to you, but cheese cheers me up when I am blue. I don't know why, but a nice sharp cheddar makes me feel a whole lot better. A Limburger Emmentor makes me grin, jump, and holler. And oh, the pleasure of a slice of Cheshire. Some men want fame and their name on marquees. Some men love money. I choose cheese." So his daughter moved to Oklahoma to escape the aroma, and his son ran off to Arkansas, which has a halitosis law, and his wife Louise sailed to Hebrides Islands, where an ocean breeze steadily blows by night and day and drives unpleasant smells away. With his family gone, Wallace P. Flynn lost all of his self-discipline. He ate cheese morning and night, cheese so strong that it turned his hair white. He walked around with a cheesy grin. He'd drive his truck to town and park it in front of Easy Ed's used cheese market. Easy Ed was a skinny old geezer with little green eyes and a great big beezer who sold old cheese that he stored in rooms deep underground in cool dark tombs. Cheese that was covered with thick green mold. Some of the cheese was 20 years old. Wallace P. Flynn drove his load of cheese back to his lonely house in the trees. To him, it smelled like fresh spring blooms, sweet and pure and good and rich, while other drivers swerved in the ditch, overcome by deadly fumes. He wrapped the cheese in a burlap sack and buried it deep in a hole out back, and covered it up and put in a pipe, so he could smell when the cheese got ripe. And when it began to gurgle and squish, and bubble and burble and smell like dead fish, he heard the gurgles and the bubbles and squishes and cried, "By George, it smells delicious." The smell was so awful, so sour and vile, the skunks had to go and lie down for a while. The squirrels picked up all the nuts that they had squirreled and moved to a distant part of the world. One day a pig stood up on his haunches and fell over flat on its back, unconscious. The smell became so fetid and rank, the mailman brought an oxygen tank. Good heavens, how the neighborhood stank! There were stories in the paper about the terrible vapors. Despite neighbors' pleas, Flynn still chomps cheese. The neighbors called the cheese police, who ordered Wallace P. Flynn to cease. "We're coming in, throw down your cheese, and put up your hands in the air and freeze," they cried, advancing through the trees. They wore cheese-proof masks and cheese-proof suits and rubberized steel-toed anti-cheese boots, more expensive than a pair of Gucci's and strong enough to keep out blue cheese. But Wallace P. Flynn locked his door and sat on the floor and ate some more Norwegian cheese, which he dug up in which he spread on bread and made a sandwich. Green putrid cheese, ugh, how it stunk. Glops and blobs and drops and drips from yellow lumps of rotten gunk that oozed through his teeth and between his lips. The cheese police surrounded the place, but tears ran down the captain's face. He grabbed a tree and stood quite still. The smell had made him rather ill. His face was pale and his knees were weak. Strong tremors shook his great physique. He gasped for breath. His eyes went dim. That cheese was much too strong for him. Halt, he cried, and then retreat, and gave his men a backward nod. They turned and ran back to the street. The cheese brigade of Diet Squad, and stood in rather loose formation, engaging in rapid respiration. The captain did not stand there flustered, but ordered the men to load their guns with butterscotch custard and sticky buns. They fired once and again, bang, bang, and then a blast of lemon meringue. And out of the house came a pitiful cry. Stop the custard, please, no more. The smell of lemon makes me gag. And old man Flynn came out the door with his hands held high, holding a big white flag. They took him away, the poor old man, and drove to town in a caravan. And eventually the case was tried in court by Chief Judge Jacqueline Hyde. And a jury sat there bleary-eyed as hundreds of experts testified. And they talked and couldn't decide. And Halloween came and Christmastide, when Wallace Flynn Jr. stood up and shouted, "Give up cheese, Daddy! Do without it!" He had just flown in from Arkansas with his wife Eloise and his mother-in-law, and a baby boy, Wallace Flynn III. "Look," he said, "you've become a grandpa. If you love your family, give your word. From this day on, no Parmesan. Promise you won't eat a bite of Velveeta. Swiss, Romano, Roquefort, Edam. Give them up, Daddy. You don't need 'em. Why devote your life to cheese when you have a grandbaby on your knees?" Wallace P. Flynn looked at Wallace number 3, and the child smiled so beautifully. And he held out his tiny hands so wide. The old cheese head broke down and cried. "I do relinquish and forswear all cheese, including Camembert, Colby, and even my Monterey Jack gift pack from aunts in Wisconsin. I never again will face a smear case. From now on, this shall be my goal, the life of zero gorgonzola. No cheese and macaroni or cheese on my beans. I'm done with cheese cuisines. Tuna melts and potatoes au gratin shall be, by me, hence forgotten." And the judge said, "Mr. Flynn, your no cheese pledge is all we need. Now go. You're free." And the jury whooped and cried. And his daughter ran to the old man's side and kissed his cheek and stroked his hair and whispered, "Daddy, we love you so." And his son wore a smile a mile wide, and he tossed the baby in the air. And the baby laughed. It was quite the show. Wallace P. Flynn took the whole Flynn bunch around the corner cafe for lunch. He enjoyed a plate of garden peas, a Chinese salad with anchovies, fresh fruit flown in from overseas, cherries and berries and jujubes, and 2 iced teas. The waitress looked at WP. "Is there anything else you'd like?" said she. "No, thanks," he said. "This is all for me. All I want is my family." That night he sailed to the Hebrides, back to the arms of his dear Louise. And they bought a cottage in a grove of trees, where humbly buzzed the bumblebees, among the petunias and peonies. And Mr. and Mrs. Wallace P. Flynn felt right at home by the ocean side, watched the tide go out and the tide roll in, and were very deeply satisfied, with sunny days and beautiful views, a low-fat lunch, and a daily snooze. Which goes to show that a person can choose to mend his ways and to begin a new life, as Mr. Flynn did with his wife. Well, that was a lot of cheese. And WP, even though he loved it so much, said, you know what? I want my family. What a great book. The old man who loved cheese. Well, thanks for joining us at Story Time at the Suttons.